Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today's video we are going to continue to talk about fantasy football and preview every single team this offseason to help you win a fantasy football title. And we are now moving to the Los Angeles Rams. We just talked about the Los Angeles Chargers, and we are moving through every team alphabetically. So if you want to go alphabetically to any city listed before Los Angeles, I've made a video about that team already. So check out my channel if you want to see my advice. I'm doing this because I want to help you guys win a title based on some of the strategies that have worked for me in the past. First, if you can guess the name of the song that I started out with in this video, and if you guess it correctly, I will answer one of your fantasy football questions on this channel. That offer is still on the table. I don't have any comments yet, so if you want to look at my old videos and check those out and guess the songs there, then you can get a couple questions answered. So I'm just putting that out there for you while I don't have a lot of subscribers or commenters at this time, especially in fantasy football. I also do a lot of other stuff on my channel as well. I make some song covers. I react to songs. I'm going to talk about some NBA stuff as well. So if you're interested in a wide variety of stuff, please check out my channel. So we will now move to the Los Angeles Rams schedule. And I do this with every team because it gives you an idea of when these players on offense could have good stretches of games and could have some more challenging matchups, which plays a big role, especially to the playoffs. And with the Rams, there's a couple items of note here. One of them is that they have a very difficult week 1 to 3 in terms of matchups. They play the Chicago Bears in week 1. Week 2, they go to Indianapolis, which projects to be a pretty good defense. And then week 3, they have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So those project to all be defensive battles. And the Rams, they have a great defense as well that I'm going to talk about later on. But could be a struggle for their offensive players, especially as Matt Stafford adjusts to this new system. But then things get significantly better. There's the stretch from week 4 to week 9 is especially good. So you want to try to buy low on these players after week 3 especially. They host Arizona, which projects to be an improved defense, but not necessarily great. Seattle, they were very bad at times last year. They got better as the season went along, but I'm not super optimistic about them. The Giants, not a good defense. Lions, not a good defense. Texans, not a good defense. Titans, not a good defense. So that's great stretch of games for you right there. But then things get a little more difficult later on in the season, and then especially to the playoffs, the last 2 games of the playoffs, if you're playing the format where you're actually using week 18 as your playoff matchup, is Baltimore and San Francisco. So if you're in an ESPN format where you're playing those last 2 weeks of the season and summing them up, that's a pretty difficult stretch of games for the Rams players. So good opportunity to buy them low after week 3 and then sell them high right around their bye week at week 11 or week 10 before they play San Francisco before the bye. So key trends to keep in mind for Rams players there. So now we move to the quarterback position, and we'll go to Matthew Stafford. So Matt Stafford, he's a very talented quarterback. He's obviously never really been able to break out and kind of prove his reputation because he's been playing for the Lions, which are one of the worst organizations in the NFL for years. He's going to get his opportunity now with the Los Angeles Rams. But for me personally, as a fantasy relevant player, I am not a big Matthew Stafford fan. And the reason why is because he's a guy that he's generally well known enough that he's going to get drafted, but he doesn't put up enough stats to necessarily make him stand out against the other quarterbacks that you can get on waivers. So we'll take a look at his stats from last season. He finished about 15th. So that's about the level of a guy that you could just be getting on waivers or streaming week to week. And he had some decent numbers. He threw for 4,000 yards, 26 touchdowns. That projects to improve a little bit now that he's got a more competent offensive system with Sean McVay. But the other big thing that I don't like about Matthew Stafford is that he's not a running quarterback. He only ran for 112 yards, and he didn't have any touchdowns running the ball. So he's a guy that he's not going to give you that floor of rush yards that, when they've got difficult matchups, especially with the way that the the beginning of their season looks, it's going to be some tough sludging for him potentially. So, and now that he's on the Rams, that adds to some potential hype level that, this is the quarterback that they've been missing the whole time. This guy's going to go off for stats, and just simply I don't see that happening at all. So my recommendation is to not draft Matthew Stafford. I'm not exactly sure where he's going to fall on the board. He's probably going to be late round picks anyway, but especially with the way they're starting the season, just don't do it. Look to potentially stream him during that middle stretch of the season, but I would not be trying to draft Matthew Stafford. Their backup quarterback is still John Wolford. I don't really think that he's going to have an opportunity to play again, but then of note, one of the biggest sleepers in the NFL, Duck Hodges, is their fourth string quarterback. So keep an eye out for him and make sure that you draft him with your fourth round pick. All right, that's a joke. I hope you're not trying to actually draft Duck Hodges. I just think that this guy's he's literally just his name is literally just like a meme, especially with how bad he is at quarterback. But yeah. Anyway, so we'll go to their running back now, and their running back situation, starting running back is Cam Akers. And Cam Akers, good running back to have, especially in standard leagues. So Cam Akers, he battled some injuries last year. His rookie season, he's still adjusting the NFL. So I do expect him to improve a little bit to the level of being a decent fantasy football player for you. But with Cam Akers, he's not necessarily the biggest PPR guy. So if you're in a PPR league, I'm not super high on Cam Akers in that sense, but I do think that he's going to be a running back that's generally not going to go super high compared to a lot of the running backs that he's going to get drafted around. So he could be some pretty good third to fifth round value for you, depending on the opportunity that he's going to get. But to me personally, I think Cam Akers, I'm interested in him, but I'm not super high on him. But he does have a lot of upside now that they've improved their quarterback situation to really give you some good stats running the ball. So good player to keep an eye out for, but a lot of it's going to depend on where he falls on the draft board, in my opinion. But it could be some good value for you as a later running back to pick up. Especially if he's going to have a lot of touchdowns. And I do project that he's going to have some opportunities as the goal line back for this team. And a lot of that is because their backup running back, Darrell Henderson Jr., is more of a receiving threat. He is another guy who's got potential but kind of has struggled to really step into it. But he did have some productive games for you last season, and he does present some good handcuff value for you. The way the Rams kind of run their running backfield ever since Todd Gurley has been out, it's been more of a committee, and I do expect that trend to kind of continue a little bit now. Cam Akers does have potential to change that, but Darrell Henderson, I think, has enough value to be relevant for you in terms of passing down situations, getting some goal line opportunities as well, potentially, that he could be a relevant handcuff for you to consider drafting. I like other handcuff options more like Alexander Madison, guys like that. But for me personally, A.J. Dillon is another one that comes to mind for good handcuffs to own. But I'm not super interested in Darrell Henderson, but he does have some decent value in my opinion. Other players of note that they have, so Xavier Jones is another young running back. He's going to need some more opportunity, in my opinion, to really stand out, but he could be a potential guy to keep an eye on if Cam Akers and Darrell Henderson are not necessarily stepping out and showing a lot of consistency. So we now move to their wide receivers. Wide receivers, a lot of it is going to be dependent on how Matthew Stafford adjusts this offense and who he's going to preference. I'm going to give you my opinion of guys that I like, but keep in mind some of this could change depending on how Matthew Stafford actually preferences the receivers. So the one I like the most is Cooper Kupp, and I think Cooper Kupp has been the most consistent of the receivers that they've had on their team, and he presents the most upside as well. So he's, I believe, in his third or fourth year at this point. He's an effective slot player. He's battled injuries, especially over the last 2 years, but he's been a very reliable target for Jared Goff. And I do expect that a lot of that will continue with Matt Stafford as well. So Cooper Kupp led the team with 92 receptions. He also had 974 yards. Didn't necessarily give you the amount of touchdowns he would have liked. He only had 3. But he's going to have opportunity in the system to excel. And I think that Matthew Stafford will do a better job of trying to give this guy some chances to really step out and take the reins of this receiver core. So I like Cooper Kupp as a guy that you can target, especially as he's not necessarily got the level of hype that he's had in his past because he hasn't broken out yet. Could be a good opportunity for him to do that now. Robert Woods is another receiver I like, but he's starting to get a little older. So what that means is that he doesn't necessarily have the upside, but he has been a very consistent receiver for the Rams for the last 2 or 3 years since he came over from Buffalo. And I do expect that will continue because they don't have a lot of other receiving options that necessarily stand out. He had 92 receptions last year, 936 yards, 6 touchdowns. So he did have more success getting into the end zone compared to Cooper Kupp. Robert Woods is going to have a lot of involvement in his offense again, and I think that it's could be some good value for you as a guy that's probably going to be available in the middle rounds of the fantasy football draft. Also of note, they signed Desean Jackson from the Eagles. This is the definition of a player that you want to avoid. So I talk about modest gains versus potential in terms of receivers that you want to take, and for running backs too. But I think this most specifically applies to receivers, is that guys that have big name value like Desean Jackson, Jared Cook is a guy I just talked about in the previous video about the Chargers. These are players that have name recognition, so they're going to get drafted higher than they probably will perform. And the other thing is that when you have names that are aging, like Desean Jackson, they're not going to give you the upside of a player that you're going to probably get in late rounds anyway that will yield you a fantasy championship. So the perfect example on the Rams is Desean Jackson versus Tutu Atwell, the second-round draft pick they got this season, or in this draft, that I'm going to talk about in a sec. But Desean Jackson represents the modest gain category, where you know he's going to be a guy that, he may give you some games where he goes off, he scores a few touchdowns, but for every game that he does that, he's probably going to have 2 or 3 games in which he just has an absolute dud performance and doesn't even catch a pass. He also didn't even play last season practically because he was injured the whole season. So this is just a trap pick. Do not take Desean Jackson at all. If he does happen to fall to you for some reason, try to just flip him immediately if he has a good game to another fantasy owner who's dumb enough to take him. That's all I'm going to say about Desean Jackson. But Tutu Atwell, I think, is a huge sleeper that you want to try to see if you can get on this Rams team. So he's probably going to be available in late rounds. He's a second-round pick from Louisville. He's known as a speed guy, and he ran a 4.27 in this draft. So to give you some reference point, the record is a 4.22, which was ran by John Ross a couple years back of the Bengals, now I believe on the New York Giants. But the key is that he's got speed, and he's got a coach that knows how to utilize it in Sean McVay. The problem with John Ross is that he had this super fast time, but the Bengals didn't know how to use him. And because of that, he's mostly been a bust in the NFL. But Tutu Atwell has a coach that I believe will put him in positions to be successful with his speed. And this is a guy that is not really getting talked about at all because he's not, the name recognition of some of these other receivers that got drafted, like Jalen Waddle, Devonta Smith, Jamar Chase, guys like that. So this is a great sleeper value rookie receiver that you can pick up late in the draft, and I think has a lot of potential for you to really step up. Let's say that there's a scenario where I could imagine him being the number 2 receiver on this team if Robert Woods slows down for some reason and isn't the same player that he was, or if Cooper Kupp gets injured again or something like that. So there's just a ton of opportunity for him. I really like him going into this fantasy football season, and I think he's a definite name that you want to try to target in this receiver core. Other players of note, Van Jefferson has been on the team, so he's a little familiar with the system, but I'm not really high on him at all until he shows me that he can be a little more productive. And now we'll move to the tight end position. And this is another sleeper that I like, is Tyler Higbee. And the Rams have been successful running a 2 tight end system with Gerald Everett and Tyler Higbee. Gerald Everett is now in Seattle. He went there over the offseason. So now there's a lot of opportunity for Tyler Higbee to take those receptions from Gerald Everett. And Higbee is a guy I've generally avoided because of the fact that they were playing that 2 tight end tandem. Because you're not, it's not all going to one tight end. It was previously going between Everett and Higbee, and at times it was a gamble of who to take. But now that there's only one, I really like Higbee, and I think that he's especially a guy that is not going to be taken particularly high among tight ends. So he's going to be in the realm of guys that you could take later in the draft that you could probably take as a stream candidate. So if you don't end up in the position where you get one of those elite tight ends, rather than reaching for somebody that could potentially be a bust for you like Jared Cook, who I just talked about, or some people who probably think that Jimmy Graham is still relevant and shouldn't be taking him at all, or Zach Ertz. I don't even think Zach Ertz is really going to even have a team this season, but guys like that have name value, but guys like Tyler Higbee are more underrated, so they're not going to get reached for in these draft boards, and you could probably take him later and get some pretty good value out of him. So I like Tyler Higbee going into this season, and I think that he could give you some pretty good value as a tight end that you can get later in the draft. So other people that have, Johnny Mundt is a guy who caught a few catches last year. I could see a scenario where they run a 2 tight end offense and he gets a little more involvement, but I don't really foresee that too much because this guy only had 4 catches last year, so he's got a chance. But I like the prospect of Tyler Higbee more just owning this tight end landscape for this team than necessarily splitting it as it's been traditionally in the past. So we now move to the defense, and this is an interesting topic. The defense is one of the best in the NFL, and I typically advocate for defenses. You want to take them in the second to last round of the draft because basically they're one of the more expendable positions. And you could, I think there's a world where you could take the opposite strategy of that and try to target a team like the Rams, the Washington football team, the Baltimore Ravens. Explosive defenses like that are some defenses that I could see a scenario where it might make sense to try to reach for them. But the thing is that when you do end up in that game where you're reaching for defenses, you're going to cost yourself a skill position player that's going to be valuable for you. And the Rams are probably going to be the first defense off the board. So if you're going to take the bold strategy of trying to reach for the Rams first, it could work for you, because they do have a lot of upside with the players that they have on their team, like Aaron Donald, Jalen Ramsey, etc. But you really have to know what you're doing if you decide to take that route, because you're going to have to pick up some skill position players either on waivers or late in the draft board that are going to be of value to you. And then the other thing of note is that the offenses in this division are expected to be a lot better. The 49ers last season, they had a lot of issues with Garoppolo's health. Seattle Seahawks are trying to bolster their line to make them a more relevant offense that's not as turnover prone as it's been at times. Kyler Murray is getting a year older. So these are all factors that work to a scenario where I could see the Rams getting reached for and not necessarily performing to that value. So I think they're a team you could reach for if you really wanted to, but I personally take the approach of trying to get some more waiver eligible defenses that you can stream week to week, or if you happen to get a defense that flies under the radar and actually has a standout performance, you can go with that one instead and get a lot of value out of that. And their kicker is Matt Gay, and he was he was decently productive in the past. Didn't necessarily get a lot of scoring opportunities for them because they had some kicker issues, and they cut their previous kicker and brought Gay in mid-season. He's going to have opportunities in his offense to get some field goals, but I think with an offense like this, he could potentially get reached a little bit past the last round of the draft where I say to take kickers. But if he's available, I think he could be a good kicker for you to take. And if he happens to be inaccurate or just doesn't put up numbers, you can just easily cut him and pick up another kicker on waivers. So, yeah, so that's all I've got about this Los Angeles Rams team. We will continue to move alphabetically through these teams as we go through the season. I believe the next one is Miami. Trying to do some quick alphabetizing in my head, but we're going to continue to move through all these teams alphabetically. So if you're interested in content like this to help you win a fantasy football title, please check out my channel. Like, comment, subscribe if you're interested as well. All right, I'll see you guys later. Bye.